We've had people come in and they're on a cane or a walker, and in 6 weeks, they're just not using anymore. Strength returns that fast, but their balance does too. And we think we know why this is. Not only is your muscles getting stronger, but remember, you're pushing or pulling in the strongest range of motion for 10 or 15 seconds. And when you do that, it takes such a neurological commitment to do that, that we believe that you're strengthening the neuron to neuron communication, which is called your myelin sheath, that you're strengthening that myelin sheath communication all the way from your brain to the muscle fibers so substantially that they actually start to react faster.
That was Kyle from OsteoStrong, the co-founder, co-creator of this product that's really transforming our bone quality, bone density. And yes, we have a long conversation about the significant improvements, not only to bone, but to muscle strength and to balance. And so this episode is really for those that are really looking to up their bone density, bone quality, muscle strength, and balance. And this will be very insightful as to how you can do that so very quickly. So without much further ado, I'd love to welcome you into the discussion I'm having with Kyle from OsteoStrong. Welcome on the Me&My Health Up podcast. How are you, Kyle?
I'm doing great, Anthony. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Where are you joining us from?
I live on a ranch just outside of Nashville, Tennessee.
Nice, beautiful. So in the country area?
In the country, we have horses, dogs, cats, soon to be chickens and goats.
Fantastic. Nice, nice. Just so that we can bring the listeners up to speed, how have you arrived at what you're doing today?
Sort of by accident. I'm what you would call a bootstrap entrepreneur here in the United States. I don't know if you guys use that term or not over there in Australia, but a bootstrap entrepreneur is just simply somebody who has an idea they want to execute on and they self-fund it. I've done that almost my entire life, and my companies have generated over $200 million in revenue around the world. But this particular company, I was thinking about getting back into the fitness industry, which is one of the companies I started back in the 90s. I really enjoyed it. I started a software company that served that industry in over 19 countries around the world. And then I was like, I want to get back into health and wellness after I sold those companies off. And so people were telling me, oh, you should start your own chain. You train clubs on how to be successful and so forth. But when I looked at the landscape of the fitness industry, it didn't really interest me. It's not that I'm not interested in fitness. It's just in the United States alone, there were over 35,000 gyms in the United States, and there wasn't a whole lot of innovation other than like niche branding, from boutique gyms to larger box gyms and everything in between. And I thought, it's just not interesting to me. I would be bored. And so right at about the time I decided I didn't want to do that, I stumbled on a guy by the name of Dr. John Jaquish. He was working on his PhD at the time, but he had developed a unique device to help people increase their bone density. And I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. And somebody was telling me about it, and I wasn't really all that interested. And then I found out that he was launching a location to use his prototype that wasn't too far from me. So I was like, oh, what are the chances of that? So I drove out to go see him give a lecture. And as I listened to him, I thought, this guy has uncovered the most profound musculoskeletal development system in the history of the world. And I think he knows it, but he doesn't fully understand it himself. So I took him out to dinner, and he's like, oh, well, and he's going on and on. And I said, well, how many of these devices have you sold? Well, he says, kind of a prototype, maybe 10. I said, okay. And so people are coming in and using this device for 5 minutes, 1 day a week, and they're getting all these results: bone density, strength, balance, getting rid of joint and back pain. And I said, okay, here's my hallucination. You correct me if I'm wrong. After a month, nobody uses your device. He says, what, do you read my freaking emails? I said, it sounds too good to be true. And if people are getting results, they'll attribute those results to anything else, because nothing that takes you that short a period of time gets you results in this world of fitness and what the human paradigm of getting healthy is. And I said, I'm interested in this technology. And I said, in fact, I'm going to be the guy that takes it to the world for you. He goes, yeah, I've had like 50 people tell me that. I'm like, well, You haven't met Kyle Zagrodzky yet because I'm a bulldog. When I get a hold of something, I don't let go, especially if it's something if I believe in it. So I said, I'll open up a couple of prototypes facilities and see how it goes. And it blew me away. The results were like, and they still are like nothing I have ever seen in the world. And I am not just talking about bone density. We got that down, but it's so many other things. And so then I started learning so much more about bone. And then it actually probably ended up saving my middle son's life and definitely changed my life substantially. And my eyes were just opened up to not only a new industry that we were developing, skeletal strength conditioning, but the true, I don't mean to seem hyperbolic, but almost an extinction level event we are facing in the next less than 100 years as in relation to just bone. And everybody's like, oh, get the environment, you've got, pollution, you've got threat of World War III and fill in the blank, all these problems. You're like, oh, another one. Yeah, I actually believe that. I've studied the research on the subject and declining bone density across so many different countries around the world that people actually won't be able to procreate in about 50 years.
Wow, what a story. I can relate to the bone issue because growing up, like there was a few people I knew that actually broke something. And now I'm a parent and I've got children and I'm constantly hearing about other children breaking something. And I'm thinking, wow, there's a lot more fractures today than certainly what I was aware of when I was growing up. And so, there's something changing. There's obviously a significant change over the last couple of decades. So before we get into that discussion, I'd love to hear more about your middle son and what he was going through and what this device did for him.
Yeah. So when he was very young, like 3 or 4 years old, he had a situation where he had a couple biomechanical development issues where his one hip was 3 or 4 inches lower than the other, but his feet, when they hit the ground, would kind of turn out sideways outwards. So imagine the outside of his feet would be kind of pointing up almost. And as a result, he couldn't stand on one foot for more than a second. He couldn't run. And so we took him, being a good parent, we took him to a doctor and then we got him to a physical therapist. And he went to a physical therapist for a year to specifically work on strength and balance and all the things. And after 1 year of never missing a physical therapy session and doing our exercises at home, his balance increased to actually nothing. It was still 1 second. He was no stronger. His balance was worse. He couldn't run. And I'm seeing kids his age hop around on one foot and run around. I'm like, okay. So then I went and talked to the physical therapist. He's like, yeah. This sometimes happens with kids. They usually grow out of it by now. And if he doesn't grow out of it, I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but he'll probably be in a cane or a walker by the time he's 25 years old. I'm like, what? Anyway, shortly after that, I started this company. Now, I didn't really know everything that like what would be the outcome of using this device, but it helped me substantially with 20 years of pretty high level chronic pain in my back and various joints throughout my bodies related to sports related injuries I had received in my late teens and early 20s, such that I was getting migraine headaches every other week. And I couldn't lift weights. I couldn't sit down for a long period of time. It was difficult taking walks. This was like me at like in my late 30s, early 40s. I was like 30 pounds heavier. And so I was abbreviating my life because of pain. And after like 6 or 7 sessions, all my pain was gone. No more migraine headaches. It's like my shoulders, my knees, my back, everything. It was like, what is this? And I think we were just talking about bone here. And now my joint pain's gone away. And so I'm like, well, maybe and it really helped out with balance too. So I thought, well, maybe my son can do it. And so he was too short for the devices at the time. So we had to rig up a few things to make it to where he could use it. And I taught him how to use it and would take him through sessions. And after about 4 or 5 sessions, and you only go in 1 day a week, it only takes like 5 or 10 minutes to do a session. It's like a no big deal. And then after like 4 or 5 weeks, my wife and I were sitting around after dinner, having a conversation. And I called over my middle son, Logan. And I said, hey, Logan, let's just check to see how your balance is doing. And so he got on one foot and he stood on one foot without any problem for a minute. And I'm just at my jaws on the floor. I'm like, a year's worth of physical therapy and collectively, 15 minutes, 20 minutes at OsteoStrong. And this is something, what is going on? Then his hips straightened out, his feet straightened out. Now he's 19 years old and he's in great shape and has no problems, and he's completely normal. It's beyond normal. He's super strong now, but it's amazing. And so that was the beginning of that part of the journey of like, what am I dealing with here? And so even though I'm not the inventor, I'm kind of the sous chef because I we took his prototype, but I didn't like it, and I wanted to redesign it. So Dr. Jaquish and I worked together to redesign it, and it is not my idea; it's partially my design. The business side of it and deploying it around the world is what I do. But I look at it as an idea as time has come, and it's really my responsibility to take it to the world. It's a mission. And so I don't really think about the business side of it very much, except to the extent of the world needs this. And if it's like failure is not an option.
And I mean, just a terrific story around your son, Logan. You know, amazing to hear that. And it's, yeah, I guess very touching, obviously touching for you. And you've been very touched by the device. Please, like, share what is the device? Like, is it something that you strap into, or is it something that you hold, or is it something you stand on? And also keen to know that I guess the biomechanics of how it interacts with the body.
So I'm going to start with how it works first, and then you'll better understand what this device does. So we've known how to build. We know how bone gets built and we've known this for over 100 years. There was a doctor by the name Julius Wolff who conducted a study in the late 1890s. And the purpose of the study, he wanted to find if bones would reform and become stronger if they were subjected to enough force. And what he found is that they did. In fact, it was such an impactful study, it became known as Wolff's Law, and it's still taught in medical schools today. Physical therapists, chiropractors, everybody knows about it. Yeah, Law, pressure makes bones stronger. And so as a result, when people were weak or had low bone density, like, oh, exercise, do this kind of thing. However, there was another researcher that answered the question that Dr. Julius Wolff could not, which is what is the minimum dose response of pressure needed to actually cause this effect? So we call the effect osteogenesis or growing new bone. And the thing that Dr. Julius Wolff couldn't answer is he couldn't determine what was the minimum amount of pressure. So like think about this. When a pharmaceutical company is testing a new drug, they want to know what is the minimum amount of drug needed to get the desired result. And so, like with aspirin, you take 1 milligram of aspirin, it's not going to do anything for your headache. You take 200 to 300 milligrams, your headache goes away. And so that would be more like a minimum dose response. So, what is the minimum dose response of pressure? So, this guy, Dr. Kevin Deere, out of Bristol, United Kingdom, decided to conduct a large study to try to figure this out. So, he had over 700 subjects in the study. And what he did was very clever. He attached these accelerometers to the hips of the subjects, and he measured the level of impact force that they would get. And he would represent that force in terms of multiples of a person's body weight. And I thought that was very clever because it would stand to reason that somebody who weighed 100 pounds, I don't know, you guys go by kilograms or pounds there, uh, versus somebody who weighed 200 pounds, a 200-pound person would probably require more force because their skeletal system was used to carrying around 200 pounds. And so the multiples of body weight was his measurement, to his method of measurement. And so what he found was interesting that only the subjects that could experience a minimum of 4.2 multiples of their own body weight would be able to trigger osteogenesis. Everybody who hit less than that amount of force saw nothing. So out of like 750 subjects, there was like 15 or 20 that were able to experience that level of force. Well, I thought it was very interesting. And so what we looked at was the different types of athletes out there. A lot of people may not realize this, but cyclists and swimmers have a higher incidence of osteoporosis in their spines and hips and this kind of thing than, say, for instance, a sprinter. So they're just not getting any impact on their spine. In fact, they're never getting impact on their spine, no matter how hard they work out. And so this is a big problem for them. But then there's another set of athletes that pound for pound, they're the strongest athletes in the world, but they retire on average on age of 19. This would be a gymnast. It's not because they work out any harder than any other class of athlete. It's because when they go spinning through the air and they hit the ground, bam, they're getting many multiples of their body weight. So they're constantly triggering osteogenesis. But they retire at 19 because it's hard on their joints. In fact, those that stay with it have a higher incidence of hip and knee replacement surgeries as they age. Impact is great for building bone. Impact is really hard on your joints. We know this. That's why we flex when we hit the ground and we fall down far. And so you can get 4.2 or more higher multiples of body weight on impact just from jumping off a chair or a counter. The problem is your hips and knees will flex because your central nervous system doesn't like impact on the joints. It could hurt. And so that's why it's so hard to do. So what we decided to design is a set of devices that would take advantage of a particular biomechanic. So imagine this, somebody's doing a bench press, right? And they got the bar right across their chest. That is the weakest range of motion, right? Because you have no leverage. But as you push the bar off your chest, you get a lot more leverage. In fact, there was a study that was published out of Brazil that found that just before you lock out, you're 7 times stronger. We call that your strongest range of motion than you were when the bar was on your chest. As it turns out, same thing for like curls and leg presses and things like this. You have a strong range as the leverage gets better, and you have the weak range. And so we thought, what if we took advantage of your strongest range of motion and we created uh, maximum force production in the strongest range of motion in an isometric position? And it has to be isometric because when you're in that range of motion, the amount of force that you could generate far exceeds the minimum dose response of pressure to trigger the osteogenic effect to build bone. And so that's what we did. We tested it out on Dr. Jakewish's mother, who was diagnosed with osteoporosis in her mid 70s, and she didn't want to take medication. So we built a prototype. She tested it out, and she no longer had osteoporosis in about a year. And she did it for a couple more years. And then she developed, her bone density got so dense that she had the bone density of a 30-year-old, and she was in her mid 70s. We also noticed that she was getting much, much stronger. So several iterations of design and development, and we have the devices that we have today. There are 4 different devices, and each device is designed to allow for maximum loading in the safest, strongest range. And you will just load, you will push or pull. So you have a technician that gets you into your strongest range of motion. They're there to guide you through it. And then you do each device for about 10 or 15 seconds, and then you're done. You don't have to repeat it. You don't have to, not like we're used with fitness where you're trying to fatigue a muscle to get it to go bigger. With the devices that we use, you're just activating a neurological trigger called a natural adaptive response. Think of it like this. If I were to go outside on a bright day, my pupils would constrict, right? Or if I would go outside on a hot day and my skin would start to sweat. These are natural adaptive built-in responses. Your central nervous system is just adapting to the environment. All we do is trigger a natural adaptive response so that your central nervous system will start building bone density, and it's more than bone density, but we'll build bone density and muscle and ligament and tendon density. So your muscles are getting ridiculously strong. Your bones have the ability to become ridiculously strong, and we see this effect. You don't need to fatigue or anything like that. In fact, you won't even break a sweat. So you and I could go do a session. We could put on a coat and tie, and we could go do a session at OsteoStrong because each device, there's 4 devices, you're only doing it for 10 or 15 seconds each. So while you are going to push or pull, depending on the device, as hard as you can for that 10 or 15 seconds, it doesn't take as long to really even get your heart rate up. You're not going to sweat. You're not going to be fatigued or even sore the next day. But you are hitting a level of force sufficient to trigger osteogenesis. And so you get off, you're like, oh, gee, I feel like I did something, and then you're done. Now, there are at OsteoStrong, there are other biohack modalities that we've put into them, like red light therapy and pulsed electromagnetic field mats and other things like that are supportive, but the primary stimulus that generates the result are the 4 devices that we've created. In fact, I just saw a testimonial today of a woman who came in with a negative 2 years ago with a negative 3.5 T-score in her hip. Now, for your listeners who may not know what that means, a 0 T-score would mean that you have optimally healthy bone. And so it compares your bone density to that of a 30-year-old of the same gender and same race as you. And so as you get away from that, that would cause your score to become negative. So like a -1 T-score would mean you're one standard deviation away from peak bone mass. -2 would be osteopenia. -2.5 would be osteoporosis. This woman had a -3.5 T-score in her hip, and I think it was like -2.5 in her spine. 2 years goes by. She had her follow-up T-score. Her doctor had the prescription ready because she didn't want to take bone building medication or bisphosphonate 2 years ago. And he's like, she came in for a follow-up DEXA scan. He's like, I got your prescription right here. Let's do a DEXA scan. Her DEXA scan in her hip was positive 1.5, meaning that she was 1.5 standard deviations above a human being's peak bone mass. She had the bone density of a professional rugby player in her hips. And she was about, I think, 1 or -0.1, just about zero in her, and sorry, 0 or -0.1, which is just about a zero in her spine, meaning that she had the spine of a 30-year-old white female, and here she was in her 70s. So she had essentially become almost fracture proof.
That's
Yeah,
yeah, that
it's
yeah, yeah,
it's
unbelievable.
unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. It is totally. What a complete U-turn, like going from where she was.
Well,
Yeah.
we just don't have thousands of testimonials like that. The way to build like there. Well, there's a couple of things to talk about in terms of like the results that people see. So I mentioned strength and balance and joint and back pain. So people are always saying, well, how long does it take to see results? Well, in regards to bone, it could take a year to 2 years to see results because bone it's a very dense material. It grows slowly, but it also grows from the inside out. So we could trigger the effect today. We could actually show that the process has started with a blood test called a P1MP blood test that measures a type of collagen that is released in your bloodstream only from the process of building bone. So when that number goes up, we could say, yep, you're building bone, but it's because it's going from the inside out. It may take a year or two to show those results. The second thing is that people don't know. There's a lot of things people don't know about bone because so much of it has just been revealed in the past couple of few years. Is that first is your central nervous system will never allow the strength of your muscles to exceed what your bones can handle. So as your bone density is going down, your muscle strength is going down. You start to strengthen your bones and your muscle strength goes up, and it goes up. It's ridiculous. Whether or not somebody is an elite, professional, world-class athlete doing whatever from powerlifting to Ironman, tennis player, golfer, doesn't matter. Within like 5 or 6 sessions, you're going to start breaking your own records. Secondly, and this goes on for people of all ages. We've had people come in and they're on a cane or a walker, and in 6 weeks they're just not using anymore. Their strength returns that fast, but their balance does too. And we think we know why this is. Not only is your muscles getting stronger, but remember you're pushing or pulling in the strongest range of motion for 10 or 15 seconds. And when you do that, it takes such a neurological commitment to do that that we believe that you're strengthening the neuron to neuron communication, which is called your myelin sheath, that you're strengthening that myelin sheath communication all the way from your brain to the muscle fibers so substantially that they actually start to react faster because we see balance improving greatly, as I mentioned with my son earlier. So you're going to see strength, balance, and bone density, which I would argue are the three components to fracture. So you don't have people that are strong and have good balance generally fracturing. It's all three systems working together, and OsteoStrong does all three. And then the other benefit being joint and back pain. Almost everybody who has chronic pain in their knee, their ankle, their back, their shoulder, like I did, all over the place, it's anywhere between 1 to 12 sessions, and you generally don't have pain anymore. I mean, I used to not be able to sit down on a plane without getting I took 15 to 20 Advil a week for almost 20 years just to mitigate getting migraines, and I could feel them coming on. I haven't taken Advil in like a decade after I did this. So all those things are benefits of what it is that we do. Now, as it relates to bone density, the thing I don't like about DEXA scans are the measurement device that measures a density of bone. And all it does is measure the density of the outside layer of the bone. And there are ways you could trick that test with certain types of supplements that will show a higher score, but that's not really has anything to do with your bone quality. Bone quality is everything. Type 2 diabetics sometimes show that they have normal or higher bone density, but they have a very high rate of fracture because their bone quality is horrible. And so there are certain types of tests that are just not ubiquitous or well known that can measure bone quality. But the things that's the one thing I don't like about DEXA scans. I'm like, well, it's not really telling the full story. And there is a strong linkage between the quality of your bone and your immune system, of your muscles, of your metabolic dysfunction. So type 2 diabetes and bone density are linked. Dementia and bone density are linked. Hormone production, estrogen and testosterone are linked to bone density. So you're talking your endocrine system, your brain, your metabolic system are all connected to bone density. And so it is the other thing I didn't mention was I was going to say earlier, you made me think of this because you said, hey, I'm noticing that there were there this many fractures going on when I was a kid? I don't really remember, but I don't think so. Well, you would be right. There are because there was a study that showed that the bone, and I think it was 2015, the bone density of teenagers and like 16-year-olds in 2015 was 10% lower than bone density of teenagers in the 1980s. So that is essentially 10 years older bone. What does that mean? I mean, why is that so bad? I mean, other than things I was talking about, it's really bad because human beings from birth till about the age of 30 are packing on bone and muscle density. It's just a function of growing. You got all these growth hormones and testosterone and all the things going on, plus they're running around and doing stuff. And so they're just packing on bone and muscle naturally. They don't hardly even have to try. Then you hit the age of 30. That is called peak bone mass. That's what the DEXA scans compare your bone density to. Well, then you just start declining at about 1% to 2% per year for the rest of your life. And there you go. And then you're old and hunched over and you feel bad. If peak bone mass for a 30-year-old today is 10% less than a 30-year-old in the 80s, their bone density is that of a 40-year-old in their 30. The president of my company, Dr. Jimmy Youngblood, he came to me 10 years ago because a friend of his and his wife were trying to get pregnant and she couldn't. The doctor warned them not to because at 31 years old she had osteoporosis. And I'll be honest, we are seeing this a lot in our centers now. People in their 30s with osteopenia, which is kind of pre-osteoporosis, and osteoporosis. It is becoming more and more and more. If a woman tries to give birth and she has low bone density or low bone quality, she could fracture her spine during childbirth. And so what I said before is extinction level event is we extrapolated this out, and it's about 2050 to 2075 bone density levels will become so low that people over 30 it'll be dangerous for them to procreate. But not only that, testosterone and estrogen levels dropping substantially with bone density as well. So immune system function, like your T cells and your B cells, the B cells make antibodies. T cells are like the primary like generals behind your immune system telling your white blood cells what to do and all that kind of stuff. Those are all created in your in your bone and in your blood marrow. As your bone quality goes down, your ability to make those cells go down as well. Chronic inflammation is constantly telling your body that, hey, turn on your immune system, something's going on. So your bone gets weaker when you are sick. It's in fact, there's been studies on COVID viruses, not just the COVID-19, but other COVID viruses that show that people have precipitous bone density drop after they've had a virus, and they saw this big time with COVID-19. And so you add to it chronic inflammation and these kind of things, and we, as just humanity, needs to address this issue ASAP. In fact, I was trying to figure out because there's a lot of things that contribute to losing bone. It's nutrition, it's poor nutrition, it's lack of vitamin D3 from the sun, it's lack of activity, it's microplastics that are in flipping everything now. And so I'm sitting there going, since all these things are contributing together, like how do I isolate what the real problem is here? And so I don't know if you remember, I think it was back in the 80s or 90s, they decided to create like this, what they called the biodome. And they were trying to see how researchers could affect their longevity markers by creating a completely perfect environment, the best water, the best air, the best food. And so they lived in there for a long time. And they would do blood tests and urine tests and spit tests and all these things to find out whether, and they did. They showed that they were going to live a lot longer. And so I'm like, is there a biodome kind of situation? As I was looking at the different countries around the world, I found one, and it was Saudi Arabia. And specifically the Saudi royal family, because a couple of reasons. One, economically, they're doing great. They have access to the best food, the best doctors, everything. Two, having big families is a thing over there. And three, they have they're more strict on, you can't marry your first cousin. And the earliest you could go is your third cousin. So they're protecting the gene pool with the Saudi Arabians. And they've got great food. They have great access to medical care and whatever. But their birth rates per thousand in the 80s were something like 35 births per thousand in the 80s. Now it's like 8. There's your biodome. Bone density is going down, and all other factors held normal. These people are declining in population and their ability to protect their country and their culture. And you know what? We are too. Australians, Europeans, Americans, Mexicans, name the country, it's happening everywhere. That was a super duper long answer to what are these genes?
Uh, but it covered a lot of ground, so it covered a lot of my follow-on questions, and there's no doubt that the listeners are really intrigued as to how they can find out more about this device and connect with you.
Well, there's actually 4 different devices in an OsteoStrong. So Jake Wish's earlier prototype, he had all exercises in one device. It was cumbersome. I didn't like the software, the user interface. Plus, if you have just one device, you're only taking one person through at a time. Like I was thinking, how do I scale this to be able to help tens of millions of people? I can't do it until we break it up into 4 different devices. We corrected some biomechanical design flaws of his original device and all this kind of stuff. And so we did that. And then we started opening up centers around the world. There's several in Australia as well. We're now in 14, soon to be 16 countries. And so we have brick and mortar businesses. We do that because you really need to be taken through with a trained technician. People also, we attract a lot of people over 55 years old who are concerned about bone density. A lot of them don't want to go into a gym and this kind of thing. They want health, but a lot of people are just like, I don't want to go to the gym. I don't know what I'm doing in there. And so we created an environment where they could just go experience it without get in, get out, go and do their one session once a week, come in their everyday clothes, they don't fitness clothes and all that kind of thing. Uh, people would find locations. They could go to osteostrong.me, which is the main website. We also have a YouTube channel and Instagram and Facebook, all the things. You could go and see like hundreds of testimonials from members and stuff like that. So they're all over the place.
Fantastic. I'll make sure everything you've mentioned are in the show notes so the listeners can go directly to the show notes and click on the link osteostrong.me. So great to hear that you're in Australia. So there's plenty of Australians listening to the podcast. So they'd be pleased to hear that there's sites in Australia that they can visit. And I really just want to thank you for your time, Kyle, and enlightening us around the topic of bone density, but not only bone density, beyond that, bone quality, and how your device really supports the bone
Is
quality, the muscle, and the balance.
well, is it okay if I add another anecdote of research in his, or do you want to go and wrap it
Sure.
up?
No,
So
absolutely.
I talked about athletic performance earlier. So if somebody wants to go and hit their golf ball, 10 yards further, they can do it. Just go to OsteoStrong. It happens with almost everybody within a month or two. But it's all types of athletics. There was a researcher by the name of Dr. Ann Sung, and she was a contractor for NASA. And so they wanted her to conduct a pilot study on OsteoStrong. The reason being, astronauts lose a lot of bone density and muscle strength when they go into outer space for too long. They could lose like 10 years of bone mass in 1 month. Like those 2 astronauts that were stuck in outer space, their bone density will not recover likely without OsteoStrong. Anyway, so she said, okay, well, I bring this up because it was just a pilot study. Now, there's been several studies done on OsteoStrong, but this one's very interesting from an athletic performance perspective for 2 reasons. Dr. Ansung was a 31-year-old professional power lifter at the time she was in the study. She was the only subject in the study. So if you were going to see whether or not a device increased bone density and strength, that's probably the least interesting person you would want to test on, because they're already at peak bone mass and they're already lifting the maximum amount of weight they can lift in the different competitive lifts. So I'm like, okay, great. So after the study, I ran into her, and the results were as follows. She not only in 6 months saw an almost 7% increase in her bone density, but her strength went through the roof. Now, Dr. Sung, she's a professional. She's not an amateur power lifter. She would track the rate of increases in each of her 5 competitive lifts month over month, as she's just a geek researcher type. She keeps track of everything. And so she was testing, okay, in this particular exercise, I increase on average 1.9 pounds a month, and this one half a pound a month. This one, she saw no change. And so it was all these kind of 1 to 1 and 1.9 pounds per month is what she could expect to see given her current training and diet regimen. She started doing the OsteoStrong study, and in 4 sessions, her rate of increase was 12 times faster than working out in the gym. She said, it would take me a year to see the results of what I saw in 4 sessions at OsteoStrong. It was that profound. And she's like, this is unbelievable. I was like, yeah, we see it with every athletic discipline, but the challenge is getting athletes to actually talk about it, because they don't want to share the thing
Yes,
that's
the
giving them a
competitive edge.
result. We had a guy set the U.S. record at an international Ironman competition in Kona, Hawaii in 2019. I spoke to a trainer, and she's a friend of mine. So I wouldn't say this unless she said it publicly, which she did on a podcast that we were doing years ago. Tim O'Donnell added OsteoStrong 6 months before that event. And she said all of the gains in his times came after he started doing OsteoStrong. And she's like, it's a game changer. She's like, it's like legal doping, like steroids. And she's like, it's unbelievable. Like his gains, it's our secret weapon. And she's like, oh crap, my partner's going to kill me for saying that. So yeah, if you want athletic performance increases, go to OsteoStrong. It doesn't matter what you're doing.
Absolutely. The Health Up listeners are all for getting a competitive edge or optimizing their health. That 1% incremental gain is what we're all seeking in terms of continual improvement. So I just want to thank you once again, Carl, for coming on the Health Up podcast. Really appreciate it. And
Oh,
please,
I'm
listeners,
I'm
share it
just
with anyone that you know that might be concerned about their bone health, or alternatively wanting to increase their athletic performance. Please share it far and wide. Would really appreciate that as well.
brilliant. Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Carl. Cheers.
Cheers.
Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand Me&My Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. Me&My Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, Me&My Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast, and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages, or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of Me&My Health Up.